Happy New Year, everyone. Hope everyone had a great 2025 and wish you all the best for 2026 as well. Now, today is going to be my first HAIKYU video of the year, so I decided to make it for the first SP character, which is going to be SP Hinata, and I'll be doing a build guide for him, just for the character himself, not only for the character himself, but also in terms of team building, so you guys know exactly how to play him correctly. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about his skills because I covered that in a previous video, so you guys can search that up on my channel. I will also try to link it in the comment section if I can remember it. But in terms of his potential build, it is actually going to be slightly tied up to his skill resonance, so I'm going to briefly touch again here, okay? So at skill resonance 4, what's going to happen is that he will be converting all of his awareness to his strength, and this is a ratio of 1 to 2.5, and that is actually going to be a better ratio than, let's say, if you actually want to manually equip the potentials yourself, because I can show you guys, for example, if I actually have a strength main stat on slot 2, it's 40% strength, whereas if I change it to awareness, it's only 20% awareness, okay? So normally the ratio between awareness to strength is 1 to 2 in terms of your potential substats and main stat. However, for SP Hinata, if you have him at skill resonance 4, he can convert it at a ratio of 1 to 2.5, and that's kind of why if you do actually have Hinata at skill resonance 4, the idea is that you want to have lots of awareness built into him so that he can convert it at a better ratio. Now, in terms of the other stats you also want to look for, the main other one that you really care about is going to be reflex, okay? So for example, for slots 4 main stat, you definitely want reflex, and that's because once you actually have high reflex, you can then actually get those critical receive. And with SP Hinata's skill 3, any critical receive you get can then allow him to do a critical spike, okay? So this reflex is going to be very important for SP Hinata regardless of skill resonance. Now, I did talk about awareness being very important for SP Hinata if you have him at skill resonance 4. However, if you only have him less than skill resonance 4, so skill resonance 1, 2, or 3, then awareness is actually going to be the stats you want to avoid. And that's once again because if you already have a high reflex on SP Hinata and also your team in general, as long as you can do a critical receive, you're going to get 100% buff in terms of awareness. So any other awareness from your potential is just going to be wasted. So that's kind of why the way you want to build SP Hinata is going to be dependent on your skill resonance. If it's so first of all, reflex is always going to be useful. However, for your offensive ability, if your skill resonance is 4 or higher, then what you want to do is you want to have high awareness so that you can convert them to strengths. Or if your skill resonance is only 1, 2, or 3, then what you want to do is you actually want to avoid awareness altogether, both from the main stat and also substat, because SP Hinata is already going to get a huge amount of buff awareness-wise by himself, okay? So that's basically going to be the way you want to differ the way you want to build potential for him. Now, in terms of the potential set, the way you want to do it, once again, is going to tie to skill resonance. So skill resonance 4 or higher, what you want to do is go for this awareness set. Once again, you can convert all of this awareness to strength. Now, there's a bit of a debuff here, which is that every single time for you to do a critical play, you'll be you'll be reducing awareness to your quick attack stats instead. However, because you have already converted all of your awareness at the start of the match due to his skill resonance 4, this is basically no disadvantage to SP Hinata at all, okay? So this is actually a brilliant, probably almost like bespokely designed for SP Hinata, this potential set. However, if your skill resonance is going to be only at skill resonance 1, 2, or 3, so basically you don't have 6 dupes on him, then the best foresight you want to do is actually going to be rapid quick attack, okay? So the reason why rapid quick attack is better than sharp sense is mainly because of the fact, once again, sharp sense increases awareness. However, you don't really need awareness with SP Hinata, provided you can do a critical receive, okay? So if you actually ignore this part of the effect, then the only thing this gives is just basically 10% strength, whereas this one can actually give up to 25% quick spike, which is a lot better, okay? So if your Hinata doesn't have 6 dupe, then the recommended foresight is going to be rapid quick attack instead, okay? Now that's gonna be the potential recommendation for SP Hinata. Now let's move on to the memory. The best memory for him is obviously going to be his own one because first of all it's a SP tier, so that already makes it very strong in terms of raw stats in comparison to others. It also have a very nice debuff ability, okay, as well. Okay, so this is just the best memory for him. Now, if you don't have this one, then the best alternative that you can go for are going to be this one for Leaf, this one for Suna, and also this free one that you can get from the challenge store. Okay, the Hinata one, the SSR Hinata one is not very good because it's just for awareness, and like I said, as long as you can get critical receive, you don't really need awareness, so this one is not good. The Leaf one is quite interesting. It's actually able to passively buffer the receive for your teammates, which is quite nice. However, it doesn't actually provide any offensive capability to SP Hinata himself unless you get a perfect receive. Okay, so that's kind of why this one I do feel like is good. It's just somewhat strange because normally you tend to have the main benefiting himself, the equipper, whereas this one is actually more like buffing up your backrow receive. And the actual effect it's able to give to SP Hinata himself is only 12% quick attack stat at the lowest level. This free one is going to be potentially can be slightly better than Lief depending on how many block trait characters are in the enemy front row, but this also lacks the passive ability of buffing up receive, the one that Lief is able to do. So this one in general I would probably say is worse than the Lief's one. However, this one is something you can get for free, okay? So you have to bear that in mind as well if you want to be budget friendly. However, the best one, to be honest, for SP Hinata is actually going to be the one for Rintaro Suna. And that's because this one, first of all, there's a flat increase to quick attack stats already, so that's slightly better than the passive receive buff, in my opinion. And then furthermore, you can even further increase it by 20% even at the lowest level, as long as the enemy has a debuff ability. Now, SP Hinata can already give debuff himself, and furthermore, one of the best pairing SP Hinata is going to have is going to be SP Kenma, and SP Kenma can also land debuff very quickly. And also in the future, once SP Suki is out in the game as well, who's also a great pairing with SP Hinata, he can also land debuff. Okay, so it's actually quite easy to land debuff in a lot of the common meta SP Hinata team comp, and that's what makes this is probably the best memory for SP Hinata as long as you team build correctly. Okay, so those are going to be the memory choices. Now moving on to teammate choices. So SP Hinata is going to be heavily relying on your teammate having high reflex so that you can do those critical receive. And basically that basically means right now in the game the best teammates for him are going to be the Itachi duo, so that's going to be Sakusa and also Komori. Now, Sakusa is able to give high reflex to himself, okay? And also, if you have him at Dupe 2, he can also do a team-wide reflex buff, which is great. It's also going to be a similar story for Komori. He has a high reflex himself on his skill 1, and if you have him at Duped up, he can also give an AoE team-wide buff to reflex as well, okay? So both of them are going to be the best teammates for SP Hinata. Now, if you don't have them and you want to be budget friendly, both of them actually have essentially a like-for-like replacement, and that are going to be in the Shotorizora school, and that's going to be Ohira and also Yamagata. So once again, one Wind Spiker and one Liberal, okay? So it's actually very easy to swap out the duo. Now, the reason why this essentially the budget version for Sakusa and Komori is because both of them also have ways to increase their own reflex. Not quite as good in terms of what Sakusa and also Komori is able to offer. So, for example, Ohira at the highest level is only 15% reflex. Yamagata can actually provide 25% reflex, but that's still not quite as good as what Komori is able to provide. Now, there is going to be one other benefit for those two characters, however, is that once you actually have them duped up, what you can see here is that they are actually able to reduce the cooldown for both Yamagata's own ultimate attack and also for Ohira. If you actually have him at 60, he can just reduce the cooldown for all of your ultimate attacks, okay? And that's also going to be quite important for SP Hinata, because first of all, SP Hinata can hit extremely hard, especially at skill level 2. It's actually becoming unblockable, so reducing his own cooldowns also going to be good. And also, if you can reduce Yamagata's cooldown even further, that's going to be ideal, because first of all, he can reduce himself cooldown by 2, and also Ohiro can also further reduce it by 2. And also, this is whenever you do a critical play, which basically means with SP Hinata, when he does a critical spike, you're also going to be keep on reducing this. And this allows Yamagata to be capable of spamming his receive. And because receive is going to be one of the actions in this game that you can't choose who is going to receive, the fact that you can actually force Yamagata, who is very likely going to have the highest reflex stats on your team, to spam receive, is going to increase the consistency of you getting those critical receive, and therefore making sure your SP Hinata can do his critical spike as well. Okay, so that's kind of why Yamagata and also Ohira are also going to be very good options for SP Hinata. Now, those are going to be the teammates who are the best pairing for SP Hinata in the game right now. In the future, we're also going to get SP Kema, SP Suki, and also SP Kuro, who are all brilliant pairings with SP Hinata as well. And in fact, the four of them are often played together as a core member of the team. I won't talk too much about them because they are not in the game right now, and I'll talk about them once they come out. But just that's something for you to bear in mind in case you want to plan your future team building plans. Okay. So that's going to be the best teammates for SP Hinata. Last topic I'm going to talk about is more going to be about positioning and also rotation, because I feel like that's also quite important, at least in this stage of the game, when especially after we just have updated our position limit and how we would come up with our lineup speciality. Okay, so first of all, where do you actually want to play SP Hinata? SP Hinata does have a skill 3, which basically increase your back row's defense tactic as long as he's in back row. So you want to maximize his time there. So that normally means you will be playing Hinata either in position 1 or in position 2. Normally what I tend to do is that if I'm defending, I'll play Hinata in position 1 because he doesn't need to serve. If I'm actually attacking, I'll play Hinata in position 2 and then set up a pinch server for him. Okay, so that's normally the way I will play it. Now, that's in terms of positioning. Now, the next thing you have to bear in mind is how do you want to do your liberal subsetting? Because the vast majority of the time, people tend to set up your liberal subsetting for your mid blocker. However, that's going to be tricky in the case for Hinata, because Hinata is a mid blocker himself. Okay, so if you actually set up your liberal subsetting to be your mid blocker and just do it as you have done before previously, then very likely Hinata will just be subbed up. Now, there is going to be a way around that, which is that what you can do is that you can actually sandwich SP Hinata between two other mid blockers. So for example here, what you can do is that in this kind of rotation, because Hinata will have a higher receive stat than my Hiragami here, Hiragami will be the one subbed out by my liberal. And then one rotation later, my other mid blocker is going to come into the back as well. However, Hiragami will still be subbed out. Once Hiragami actually moves on the front, your liberal would then try to swap out with another mid blocker at the back. However, in this case, because Hinata is sandwiched between the two, you are going to see a case where Suki is going to have lower receive stat than Hinata, and therefore he will be subbed out again. Okay, so basically, if you actually sandwich Hinata between two other mid blockers, you can protect him from being subbed out by your liberal. However, there's also going to be one major flaw with this plan, which is that there are going to be a rotation where the three mid blockers are all going to be at the back because you are sandwiching them together. Okay, and that basically means unless you put another blocker up front, otherwise you have no one capable of blocking in this particular rotation, which is not ideal. So in order for the sandwich strategy to actually work, you are unfortunately forced to bring another blocker on top of the two existing mid blocker you already have. Okay, so what that can possibly mean is that you may end up in a formation with 4 mid blockers, which can still work, to be honest, but it's just something you have to bear in mind. Or you can also play Hoshiyumi, who is going to be a wind spiker but capable of blocking. Okay, so those are all going to be the things you have to bear in mind. So this strategy can still work. You just have to make sure you bring a fourth person who is capable of blocking, okay, or a third person capable of blocking outside of two that will be sandwiching Hinata. Okay, so that's something you have to bear in mind. And the other caveat for this is that you have to be very careful with your lineup specialty, because now your team is going to be heavily focused on block specialty. So whether or not you can even come up with an overall lineup specialty, it's going to be somewhat difficult. And a lot of time it's going to be tied up to your setter. Okay, so for example here, if I actually change it to Kuro, who have a quick specialty, and I also have Kagayama, who is also a quick swiper, then I can have a quick specialty. However, if I change it to Hoshiyumi, what I'm then forced to do is I'll have to play SP Kenma in the future to make this team have any kind of specialty, in which case it will be a received specialty. Okay, so that's basically something you also have to bear in mind if you do use this strategy. Okay, so let's say if you don't want to use the sandwich strategy and you don't want to sub out your mid blocker as for your liberal, then what are the other options? So you can also try to sub out as Wind Sparker, but that's not normally recommended either, because I did just talk about some of the best pairings for SP Hinata, and you will have noticed Sakusa and also Hira, they're both Wind Sparkers, so ideally you don't want to sub them out. If you have Hoshiyumi as skill rating 4, he is also a very good pairing with Hinata as well, because he is going to have a huge amount of reflex and makes him capable of also doing critical receive. So ideally you also don't want to sub him out, and that basically means you want to avoid Wind Sparker for your liberal substitution. And then that just basically means you are left with either subbing out your opposite hitter or subbing out your setter. Now the thing with those two positions is that in the traditional team building sense, normally you only tend to have one of them on your team. And if you have only one of them on the team, by the time they are rotated to the front, you would then have no one capable of subbing in for your liberal. So that's going to be something you have to bear in mind. Now, for example, the way I play it right now is that I am choosing to sub out my opposite hitter, which is going to be Ushijima. However, I have positioned Ushijima in a place where he will enjoy a huge amount of time at the back. So essentially, in my setup right now, I am basically using this slot predominantly just for Komri. And by the time my Ushijima is rotated to the front, or when he starts off at the front, it's just fine. I just don't have a liberal for the time being. Okay, that's just going to be the trade-off you have to make. Now you can of course also try to play two opposite hitter, so therefore that you can actually spread them out and just have one being subbed out by the other. The main problem with that is that most people don't actually have two high rarity opposite hitter, because the only UR opposite hitter we have right now in the game is going to be Osamu and also Ushijima, and vast majority of the time people only decided to pull on one of them because previously you can only play one opposite hitter. Okay, so that's just something you have to bear in mind. However, the most ideal way, in my opinion, and also the way I'm going to do it in future, is actually going to be playing SP Hinata in a double setter formation. And once again, if you guys have two setters, you can just sub them one. Basically space them out so always they're equal distance apart. So one will always be at the front whilst the other one's at the back. So this way you can make sure the coverage of your liberal is going to be for the entire match. Okay, and the reason why double setter is going to be slightly easier than double opposite hitter is because of the fact that a lot of people do actually tend to pull multiple setters because of the different speciality, etc. So you would actually have them leveled up. And also in the near future, we're going to get SP Kenma, SP Sugawara, and also SP Akashi. So you're actually going to have loads of good other SP setter to form a double setter formation, which for opposite hitter is going to be a lot harder. You have to wait for a very, very long time before we get an SP opposite hitter. Okay, so that's just something for you guys to bear in mind. Double setter is easier than double opposite hitter. And with this double setter setup, what you can then do is basically make sure that you would have your setter being set as your liberal subsetting, so that you would always have your liberal coming in. Okay. Now, last thing I want to mention before I close the video is going to be the deployment bond between UR Kagayama and SP Hinata. Now, I know because this looks very strong on paper, a lot of time people are wanting to put them together. However, I just want to warn you guys, this is going to be a bit of a double-edged sword. And the reason for this is that whilst Kagayama is actually able to buff up the reflex for your teammate, which can then in turn means a critical receive and then critical spy for SP Hinata, that stack of the buff or competitive drive will actually be consumed unless it's Hinata himself doing the receive. And because in this game you can't choose who will be receiving, it's actually very likely you'll be consuming the stack of competitive drive, okay? And that basically means if we actually take a look at how else competitive drive can be used, normally the way competitive drive is used is that it's used to increase awareness and also the strength of your spiker. Now, because this is not ability you can just turn on or turn off at your will, what this deployment bond with SP Hinata is going to mean is that yes, it can essentially make your SP Hinata spike a lot harder because it can give him more consistency of critical spikes. However, for all of your other spikers, if competitive spirit has already been used up by your receive, it can actually mean that all of your spikers are going to lose out on this increase of 20% awareness and also 15% strength. So that's kind of why I say it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and whether or not you can actually use this effectively is going to be dependent on how fast you can actually build up this competitive spirit, and that right now is going to be highly conditional in terms of your enemy team building, because the way it is that you get a competitive spirit when your opponent actually perform a critical spike or settle down or surf. Okay, so you are kind of at mercy of your opponent's team building. Now in the future, this is not going to be as much of a concern because you're going to have more and more character capable of, you know, crazy high amount of crit rate and also high reflex, etc. So it's going to be easier for you to actually build up this buff. However, for the time being, I'm just going to call this out. This can be a bit of a double-edged sword and actually harm your team a lot more than what it can actually benefit. Okay. Also, in the near future, we're going to get SP Nishinoya, who can also provide another way of getting your competitive spirit stacks. So that can also be a very good pairing alongside with SP Nishinoya and also Yu Kagayama. But once again, that's not in the game right now. Okay. So just be very careful if you do decide to play Yu Kagayama alongside with SP Nishinoya. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to talk about for SP Hinata. Let me know what you guys think and also your experience so far playing with him.